Welcome, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kerstin Opfer from Germanwatch, and I am today's moderator. We are very proud to present to you the 18th edition of the Climate Change Performance Index, which we publish annually since 2005. The Climate Change Performance Index, in short CCPI, is an independent monitoring tool that tracks the climate performance of 59 countries and the EU. The CCPI aims to enhance transparency in international climate politics and enables comparison of climate protection efforts made by individual countries. With this, I warmly welcome our two co-authors of the CCPI, Jan Burg from Germanwatch and Professor Dr. Niklas Höhne from New Climate Institute. Also with us is Janet Melongo from Cannes Climate Action Network International. And last but certainly not least, a warm welcome to all our contributors and colleagues around the world who help us to develop the CCPI. It is your effort and dedication that makes this possible. With this, I hand over to Professor Dr. Niklas Höhne. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome from my side as well. This is the 18th time, so 18 years in a row, we are publishing this Climate Change Performance Index. And we always look at four different things. One is the greenhouse gas emissions. We look at how countries perform on renewable energy. We check the energy use, so energy efficiency and how much energy is used and what the trends are. And we look at climate policy. And if we go on the next slide, you can see that, well, there's 14 indicators that we are using. For the greenhouse gas emissions, we are now using emission estimates from the year 2021. So the data includes the rebound after the COVID pandemic, not yet 2022, but we are including 2021. And we're always looking at the current level of emissions or renewables or energy efficiency, but also the trend, whether the trend is in line with what's necessary for the Paris Agreement. If you click one further, then you can see on the greenhouse gas emissions side, we also look at targets, because this is one important thing of this conference, whether countries update their greenhouse gas mitigation targets, so that's something that flows into it. On the climate policy, and that is something very special of this index, we asked 450 experts around the world to rate the climate policy of the countries. That is unique, and there's no other project that is doing that. So one first remark on the results. We see that the energy crisis really is in the way of ambitious climate policy right now. We see that there's a huge dash for gas, that many countries are implementing new fossil fuel infrastructure, in particular gas. And if we are serious about the Paris Agreement, we do not need new gas infrastructure. And we also see that some countries that we list here, they don't have that need to build new gas because they have started very early on energy efficiency and renewables, and they are basically have a much better position now. But for the details, I hand over to Jan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Niklas, and I'm now happy to present you this year's results of the Climate Change Performance Index. You see here the map. If you check the map, you see which countries we cover. These countries, our 60 countries, or this year 59 countries, because we had to exclude Ukraine, are covering nearly 92% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So these are the countries that are really responsible for the problems we are facing. Next slide, please. So again, we check with our indicators whether one of the leading countries is on track to prevent dangerous climate change. Despite that we have leaders and they're doing better than the others, even the countries in the front like Denmark, Sweden, Chile, Morocco, India are doing not enough to prevent dangerous climate change, so we cannot put them on the podium this year. However, few sentences on Denmark, for example. Denmark is in these 3 out of 4 categories ranked high or very high. This is a good thing. However, experts criticize even Denmark about its high energy use and a lot of room for energy efficiency in Denmark, still there. And the policies they have in the moment are not sufficient to reach their own set targets until 2025. If you look at the three countries, more the developing countries, which are on the front, Chile, Morocco, and India, they have in common that have relatively low emissions altogether, relatively lower per capita emissions. All are trying to extend the renewables very much. This is distinguish these countries very much from the developing countries in the end. Like the three countries, Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, are really having no renewables in the moment. And so here we see a big change, a big difference regarding the solutions, regarding energy use and renewables, but also, of course, regarding the emissions. And now I want to emphasize a bit on the elections that we had in the last year, and put just some countries in the front. First of all, maybe Sweden was a long time, since I can think of, it was always in the top 10. Now we have a policy shift in Sweden, and the experts really fear that Sweden will drop its performance and will have a worse performance, and therefore could drop in the next year's ranking. We have interesting results regarding the United States and Australia. The good thing, in both countries went up a bit in this year's CCPI because of policy change. The difference here is that the policy change in Australia didn't go so far until now. We have better targets and we have a better policy evaluation. However, there is no implementation package on the way now. So this is the next step that needs to be done. And this is the difference to the US. We really now have an implementation package in the US, one of the biggest investment packages this country has ever seen regarding climate change. And if this will really then occur and seen on the ground, then the US can further move up. One last rank to the world's biggest emitter, like is China. China dropped this year about 13 ranks because of new coal initiatives, new coal power plants, and extension of the emissions very much. However, we also see China as one of the biggest developer of renewables in the world. And if this is occurred, then also maybe next 2 years in the emissions, then China can climb up again in the ranking. Having said this, I'll give the word to Janet.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to start by thanking Germanwatch, the new Climate Institute and Climate Action Network, together with the 450 climate and energy experts who supported and contributed to this index. Cannes notes and lauds Morocco for its 7th place score and the progress that it's had in going one place up from the previous edition of the CCPI. We also note other countries like South Africa have gone down. South Africa has gone down 5 places to the position of 44 now. There are various reasons for that. One being that it's a coal producer, fossil fuels subsidies are still in existence. There's still a support for fossil fuels generally. And we hope for the JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, to be effective in that country particularly, and along with a clear phase-out plan and more climate finance. So generally on the very low category, that is the category marked in red, it is interesting to note that most of the countries there are fossil fuels producers. And about 5 of them are actually the largest producers globally. While their renewable scoring, of course, is expected, is dismal, and the fossil fuel phase-out plans in those countries are either disappointing or even non-existent in some cases. So the There are lots of takeaways for all countries generally. My focus today will be on the African countries. And African countries particularly because of the position they are in currently in trying to determine their energy futures. So, and African countries also because they have low emissions currently, about 3%, sorry. So looking at the CCPI again, it is clear that heavy reliance on fossil fuels results in high GHG emissions, as is the case in a country like Saudi Arabia and several others in this scoring. Also, it is very obvious that the idea of a resource of fuel mix is a fallacy. As you can see, such a scenario has greatly impacted the scoring of some countries, China in particular. So it shows that clearly trying to mix fossil fuels with renewables is just not an effective way forward. And good climate policy is paramount, and targeted efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is also very much required, and it also improves the performance of a country. As you can see, has greatly improved the EU and Morocco performance, particularly in this index. And climate ambition must also remain very high and very progressive. As can be seen again from the index, the lack of any country clinching the first 3 slots is caused by this, that ambition was just not high enough across the board. There's a lot to be achieved by all countries across the board, and we have a very short time to achieve what is needed to be achieved. We have about just 2,605 days to the year 2030, so very, very short time. So any defiance or delay to raise ambition and undertake immediate action has repercussions for any country's performance. Again, looking at the index here, we see it has had an effect on countries such as South Africa. In addition, renewables not only support climate ambition, for Africa particularly, this would be a great help, great support in adaptation efforts as well on the continent, which is very key. Currently, the continent is suffering the brunt of climate impacts. There are several floods, there are several droughts being experienced. So a shift, a very purposeful and massive shift to renewables will create several opportunities, will compound several wins for Africa as a region. And we also laud countries that are making their pledges and commitments on 100% renewables, such as India, the EU, some Latin American countries, and we urge other countries to follow suit as well. Renewables do go a long way and play a catalyst role in achieving all sustainable development goals. And this is something that African countries are struggling to achieve, and therefore renewables would be a great driver. Of course, in ending, there also cannot be climate justice without human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our 3 speakers and for their strong call for more ambition. We have now time for your questions. I would kindly ask you to only raise your hand if you're press and name your name and affiliation, please. The man with the white cap, please.
Thank you. It's Masato Kimura, Japanese freelance journalist. My question is about India and Japan. So Indian ranking is why so high, eighth, and Japan is very behind. Why?
Maybe I start and you can add. So India's performance, so if you compare, for example, India's and Japan's per capita emissions, you would find that the per capita emissions in Japan are around 6 times higher than in India. At the same time, we see that, thank you. And at the same time, we see that India is really trying to evolve its renewable energy emissions, renewable energies, and in Japan, I would say so. First of all, the really specific questions, please ask the Japanese experts. That's why the CCPI is created like that we have country experts for every country. But if you look at Japan, the main problems are that after Fukushima, the shift to renewables never really happened. They went to coal, they went to gas, and now to nuclear again. The reduction of the energy use has not happened, so Japan is still in the beginning of a transformation. And if Japan would take up speed, then they can move up quickly. And maybe Niklas, in addition.
Yeah, maybe quickly. Indeed, I think Japan is in a complete different situation. No, they with the high per capita emissions, and good is that there is at least plans on the table, but the clear implementation policies are missing for Japan. Clearly, Japan, for example, would have to phase out coal, and there are no plans on the table for that. The main thing is we have no time to lose. No, it is very, very urgent that countries very quickly change their policies, and changing policies is not an easy thing, and it doesn't have an immediate effect. So having a nice plan is good, but not enough at all. We are measuring real emission reductions. If the real emission reductions are not happening, you don't see it. And for India, we currently see that emissions are still low, but they are rising. The emission estimate for India is that it would have risen in the year 2022 by 6% in only 1 year. That's not in our index yet, but if that trend continues, then India risks of moving down the ladder. But right now, they have very low emissions, and that's why they're relatively high.
Thank you. Any further questions? The gentleman here.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Aishuka Andrew. I come from Uganda, and I do report for Infonile. So Infonile is an organization, and we do report along water issues along the Nile Basin. My question is about the tweet that the president put out yesterday, my president, that's Mr. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, and basically was blaming most Western countries for being hypocritical in what they do. Today they are saying we are committing, then the other day they are saying we are not sure. And we have seen that most of these countries have developed on, using these fossil fuels. So my question is, what is the deal for African countries? And we have seen that none of them, I think we have seen like 3 or 2 appear on the very high guys that are, maybe polluting the whole earth. So what's the deal for the African countries, and what is there? What mechanism is there for them to forego the fossil fuels vis-a-vis, the other thing that you're putting in place? Thank you so much.
Maybe I start with an answer regarding the methodology, and then Janet can add a bit more on the African situation, because I am, well, in general, we ask in the CCPI about the performance nationally and internationally. So the experts also check whether the countries, for example, Germany gets a lot of negative points for its initiative in Senegal to have, together with the Senegal, more gas exploration, for example. So the experts recognize that there is maybe a misleading policy regarding the cooperation of Senegal and Germany. So this is part of the CCPI, and what I think Janet elaborated a lot about what is the chance for Africa. Africa is the chance for me. It's always the thing that I hope that Africa and India, both about 1 billion people, won't make the same mistakes we done. So that's the big hope, and that's why we have to support Africa. Don't make the same mistakes. So that's a simple, very simple answer and short answer, but probably Janet can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yes, the call is for Africa not to make the same mistakes as the rest of the world made before. And as I mentioned earlier, Africa's emissions are already low. So there's really no need to increase those emissions. in a situation where Africa has immense renewables resources. So it's just a question of getting the financing, having the political goodwill, which is very key. And Africa also has the unique challenge of the current infrastructure, the fossil fuel infrastructure also just not working for the continent. So fossil fuels pose a very good opportunity to redefine that and enhance energy access, particularly for the poor, for the rural regions and the rural people, and for everybody to achieve true energy access. And as I said again earlier, renewables are also a cornerstone for achieving other sustainable development goals, which would be very key for Africa. Thank you.
The gentleman here. Yeah, the blue shirt, please.
Oh, hi, I'm Nick O'Malley from the Sydney Morning Herald. I've got two very quick questions. Does this report suggest that efforts to accelerate the transition of South Africa through finance have failed or are failing, firstly? And secondly, given that there seems to be transitions dependent on elections, is there evidence in the report that action on climate is in danger of just being hijacked by political trends around the globe?
Okay, on the second question of whether elections are hijacked on the general political trends, I think one very interesting thing that you can see, there have been some changes in governments in the US, in Australia, in Germany, and that led to a better rating in their policies of the countries that we have here. But it has, since it's just recent, has not led to reductions in emissions, which we also see. So there's this lag between the elections, then having a good program, then the program needs to be implemented and then has an effect on greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a long process. And even the countries where you had a recent change in government, they have not moved very quickly because it's simply not possible to quickly change things. And that's, again, the most important point here, that it's so urgent. And if governments now make mistakes, we simply don't have the time to do that. And the mistakes are right now in the direction of building new fossil fuel infrastructure, new gas pipelines, looking for new gas and oil fields. And as I said, other countries that have not done that, that have high shares of renewables, don't need to do that because they're already there. I would not say, definitely not say that, well, South Africa went a little bit down, but there is significant efforts right now on financing the just transition, which is very good and applauded. But again here, it's a long process. It doesn't show up immediately, and I think South Africa should continue that way. But maybe you want to say something, Janet, on South Africa.
Yes, just to reiterate that the performance is coming together of so many factors, and it will be interesting to see maybe in the next edition of this index how the finance efforts of South Africa play out. But there are several other factors, as you've heard, and so yes, it's several things coming together.
And maybe to add on your second question, what we see is that in the countries with a robust Climate Change Act, which is not changed by every government. So this is the real crucial thing, not to change every 4 or 5 years when you have elections to the climate policy. And the UK is a good example. The first country with a Climate Change Act, I think back in 2008 or something like that, was always in the top 20. Even though they fell down now this year, it is really crucial to have a clear framework which you don't change every year, especially for the economy and for investment security. So this is the success story behind some countries in the front. Sweden established a CO2 price back in the 90s, and now they really go to very low emissions. So it's a long way that Niklas describes.
Thank you very much. A very quick question to the gentleman who raised the hand since the beginning. Please, very short question and short answers.
Yes, there is any study in relation for the countries for the low performance with the increasement of military developments, because I can see from the number 50 until 63, they are the countries who are responsible for more than 60% of the pollution. And these countries are members of the G20, they are members of the Security Council, some of them. And so there is any study between failure to perform and more military spending. And the second one about the countries suffering of poverty, like Asia, Latin America, and Africa, if there is problem with corruption and the lack of good government.
I didn't get the question.
Well, one important thing, you were mentioning the ones on the bottom of the list. The one new thing that we had here is that we also highlight the fossil fuel production companies. They have this little flame there that you can see on the rating, which is, I think, very concentrated at the bottom. So many countries that have the fossil fuel production are rated very low. We don't make the link to military as you have made it. That's we simply haven't looked at it. But there is a correlation between fossil fuel production and being not very well rated. But I think our time's up.
Yeah, our time is up, and we are happy to answer questions outside. There's Christoph Bahls, Niklas Höhne, Janet Longo, and we are outside and waiting for you for interviews. Thank you, and sorry for this interruption.